The library was a sanctuary, a cavernous space filled with the soft rustle of pages turning and the faint scent of old books. Under the warm glow of a desk lamp, Jonathan Carter hunched over his notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the late hours of the night as he prepared for another day of classes in the prestigious medical school he had fought so hard to enter. He was a brilliant student, known for his sharp intellect and unwavering determination, but the pressure weighed heavily on him. Jonathan could hear the distant sounds of his classmates laughing and socializing outside the library's walls, but he pushed those thoughts aside. He had a dream to become a doctor and serve his community, a dream that fueled his late-night study sessions and early morning lectures. Just a few more hours, he muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. The pages of his textbook were filled with complex terms and intricate diagrams, but to Jonathan, they were more than just words. They were the foundation of his future. As he scribbled down notes, he remembered the words of his grandmother, who had always encouraged him to chase his dreams despite the obstacles he faced. "You can't let anyone tell you what you can or can't do, Jonathan," she would say, her voice ringing in his ears. He could almost picture her now, sitting in her favorite chair, a warm smile on her face. It was that memory that kept him going, reminding him of the sacrifices made for his education. The next day, the atmosphere in the lecture hall was electric. Jonathan stood at the front, ready to present his research on the impact of socioeconomic factors on health disparities. He took a deep breath and looked out at his classmates and professors, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "Good morning, everyone. Today, I want to discuss how socioeconomic status can dramatically influence health outcomes in underserved communities," he began, his voice steady. As he spoke, the room filled with a palpable energy. His passion for the subject shone through, and he expertly navigated through complex data and case studies, illustrating his points with clarity and conviction. "We must recognize that access to healthcare is not just a privilege, but a right. It's our responsibility as future medical professionals to advocate for those who are often overlooked," he urged, his heart racing as he saw heads nodding in agreement. "Impressive work, Jonathan," said Dr. Thompson, the course professor, as he concluded his presentation. "Your analysis is thorough and insightful. It's clear you've put a lot of effort into this." Jonathan felt a rush of pride at the compliment, his hard work finally paying off. But the following day, everything changed. Jonathan sat at his desk, sipping his morning coffee when his phone chimed with an incoming email. He opened it, his heart sinking as he read the subject line, "Notice of academic misconduct." Confusion washed over him as he skimmed through the contents, each word feeling like a dagger to his heart. The email accused him of plagiarism in his recent research paper, a claim that was not only false but devastating. No, this can't be happening," he whispered to himself, his hands trembling. He felt the walls closing in as he processed the implications of the accusation. A hearing was scheduled, and the thought of defending himself against such a serious charge filled him with dread. Jonathan closed his eyes, trying to steady his racing heart, but the reality loomed larger than ever. This was not just about his education. It was about his integrity, his future, and the very foundation of his dreams. With each passing moment, Jonathan's mind raced with questions. Who could have done this? Why would anyone want to sabotage him? As he stared blankly at the screen, he knew he had to fight back. He couldn't let this baseless accusation define him or derail his aspirations. Taking a deep breath, he stood up, determination replacing fear. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready to confront them head-on. Jonathan Carter would not be silenced. Jonathan sat across from Maya in the dimly lit cafe on campus, a steaming cup of coffee forgotten in front of him. The weight of the plagiarism accusation clouded his thoughts, making it difficult to focus on anything else. Maya, however, was a force of nature, her determination shining through as she leaned in, her eyes fierce with conviction. "Okay, Jonathan," she began, her voice steady. "We need to gather evidence. This isn't just about your paper. It's about showing them that you deserve to be here as much as anyone else." Jonathan nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. But where do we even start? Dr. Thompson has all the power, and I'm just me. His voice trailed off, a mixture of frustration and fear. Maya reached across the table, placing her hand on his. You're not just you. You're a brilliant student, and we both know that. Have you looked into his past? Maybe there's something there we can use. His past? Jonathan tilted his head, considering her suggestion. What do you mean? Think about it. If he has a history of favoritism or bias, that could help us build a case. We could talk to other students, gather their experiences, and see if there's a pattern. You're not the first one he's targeted. I can feel it. Jonathan took a deep breath, the idea taking root in his mind. You're right. I need to know more about him. If I can show that this isn't just a personal attack, but part of a larger problem, it might make a difference. Exactly, Maya exclaimed, her enthusiasm infectious. Let's start with the student forums. There are always whispers about professors. We can dig through those and see what we find. As they continued to brainstorm, Jonathan felt a sense of purpose returning. He had always been tenacious, driven by his dream of becoming a doctor to help his community. Now he realized that fighting back against the injustice he faced was another way to serve that community, by shedding light on the discrimination that was often swept under the rug. Later that evening, Jonathan sat at his desk, the glow of his laptop illuminating his determined expression. He had spent hours researching Dr. Thompson, sifting through online forums and past reviews. With each click, he uncovered a troubling pattern. Complaints about the professor favoring certain students, often those who were well-connected or came from privileged backgrounds. This is it, he whispered to himself, a sense of vindication washing over him. I can't let them silence me. The next day, with a file full of evidence in hand, Jonathan met with Maya again. They found a quiet corner of the library, the air thick with the scent of old books and the soft rustle of pages turning. Look at this, Jonathan said, his voice barely containing his excitement as he handed her the printed documents. There are multiple accounts here. Students mentioning how Dr. Thompson would overlook their work, while praising others for similar efforts. It's all right here. Maya scanned the pages, her brow furrowing. This is great, but we need to make sure we're ready for the hearing. They might question the validity of these sources. Jonathan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I know. I just wish it wasn't so intimidating. I mean, they're going to have a whole panel against me. You're not alone in this, Maya assured him, her voice firm. I'll be right there with you. We can practice your responses, go over what you'll say. You have to stand your ground, Jonathan. You know your work better than anyone. Thanks, Maya, he replied, gratitude swelling in his chest. I don't think I could do this without you. As the days passed, Jonathan found himself increasingly anxious about the impending hearing. He spent long hours reviewing his research and preparing for the worst. He couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider in a system that seemed rigged against him. On the eve of the hearing, Jonathan sat in his room, his mind racing. He thought of the professors who would question him, especially Dr. Thompson. He recalled how the professor had always seemed to look through him rather than at him, his dismissive comments ringing in Jonathan's ears. What if he's just out to get me? Jonathan muttered to himself, pacing back and forth. What if it's not just about the paper? Just then, his phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Maya, a simple message that read, Remember, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who's had to face this kind of injustice. You've got this. Reading her words, Jonathan felt a surge of determination. Tomorrow, he would stand up for himself, not just as an individual, but as a voice for all those who had been silenced. He closed his laptop, ready to embrace the challenge ahead, his heart pounding with purpose. Jonathan stepped out of the hearing room, his heart still racing from the barrage of questions thrown at him. The walls of the building felt like they were closing in, and he could hear the muffled voices of the faculty behind him, their judgment echoing in his ears. He spotted Maya sitting on a bench, her brows knitted together in concern. As he approached, her expression shifted from worry to relief. Hey, you okay? She asked, standing up and reaching for his arm. Jonathan shrugged, the weight of his defeat hanging heavily on his shoulders. I don't know, Maya. It felt like they were more interested in making an example out of me than actually listening to what I had to say. Maya's eyes narrowed with determination. You can't let them get to you. You've worked too hard to let this ruin everything. We'll figure something out, I promise. He sank onto the bench, running a hand through his hair in frustration. What if I lose everything? My scholarship, my future, all because of this accusation. They didn't even consider the hours I put into my research. They just see a black student who's suddenly a threat. Jonathan, listen, Maya said, kneeling in front of him, her hands gripping his knees earnestly. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the systemic issues that you're uncovering. You have to keep fighting. You're not alone in this. Jonathan looked up at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. What if it's too late? What if I can't prove my innocence? Maya shook her head vehemently. It's never too late. We'll gather evidence, talk to people, and figure out a way to challenge this. You're not the first to face this kind of crap at this school, and you won't be the last. But you can change things for those who come after you. He took a deep breath, feeling a flicker of hope in her words. You really think so? I know so, she replied, her voice steady. Let's start by digging into Dr. Thompson. There has to be something in his history that we can use to our advantage. As they began to strategize, Jonathan's mind whirled with images of his peers and the injustices they faced. The thought of Dr. Thompson being part of a secretive faculty group that targeted students of color began to gnaw at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random accusation, but part of a larger pattern. Let's look into any complaints against him, Jonathan suggested, a newfound determination rising within him. If he's been biased before, it could help establish a pattern. Maya nodded, her fingers flying over her laptop as she began to search for any relevant information. I'll check the student forums and any official complaints that have been filed. If we can find even one other instance of him discriminating, it could strengthen our case. Jonathan felt a swell of gratitude for Maya's unwavering support. I don't know what I'd do without you. This feels like an uphill battle, but knowing you're in my corner makes it easier to bear. Maya paused her typing and looked him in the eye. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who's been pushed aside or silenced. This is your chance to expose the truth. Jonathan nodded slowly, the gravity of her words sinking in. He realized that he had a responsibility, not just to himself, but to those who might follow in his footsteps. The thought ignited a fire within him, fueling his resolve to document every instance of discrimination he encountered. Let's start a journal, he said, his voice steady with purpose. I'll note down everything I see, all the microaggressions, the unfair treatment. If I can gather enough evidence, maybe we can present it to the administration. Maya grinned, her enthusiasm infectious. That's the spirit. We'll show them that this isn't just about one accusation. This is about a culture of bias that needs to be addressed. As Jonathan opened a new document on his laptop, he felt a sense of empowerment. He began to type, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he documented his experiences, the conversations he'd overheard, the subtle looks that lingered a moment too long, the whispers that followed him down the hall. In that moment, he became more than just a student fighting for his future. He became a voice for those who had been silenced, a beacon of hope in a system that needed change. And as he looked up at Maya, he knew that together, they were ready to challenge the status quo. Jonathan sat in the cramped office of Dr. Thompson, the air thick with tension. The walls were lined with diplomas and accolades, but they felt like a mockery to him now. He clenched his fists in his lap, trying to suppress the surge of emotions boiling within him. The professor, seated behind his mahogany desk, appeared unfazed, flipping through a stack of papers with a disinterested expression. Why was I singled out, Dr. Thompson? Jonathan's voice was steady, yet the question hung in the air, heavy with accusation. I worked hard on that paper. I don't understand how you could accuse me of plagiarism. Dr. Thompson looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. Jonathan, you must understand that academic integrity is non-negotiable. I have to ensure that all work submitted is original. Your paper raised some flags, and I had to act accordingly. Jonathan felt a rush of frustration. Flags? What flags? I followed every guideline, and I can provide my research notes to prove it. This feels personal, and I deserve an explanation. Dr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're a bright student, Jonathan, but sometimes it's not enough. You need to remember that the world isn't always fair. Some students just have a better grasp of how to navigate it." Jonathan's heart raced as he fought to maintain his composure. "Are you saying I don't belong here? That I'm not capable?" "Not at all," Dr. Thompson replied, his tone condescending. "But the reality is that there are expectations to meet. You must understand that sometimes perception is reality." Jonathan stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't about perception. It's about your bias. I see it, and I know others do too." He took a breath, his voice shaking but resolute. "I won't let this go without a fight." "Good luck with that," Dr. Thompson replied, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. As Jonathan exited the office, he felt a mixture of anger and despair. He could sense the walls closing in around him, but he refused to let them crush his spirit. Later that day, he met Maya at their favorite cafe, a cozy spot just off campus. She looked up from her laptop as he plopped down across from her, his face etched with frustration. "What happened?" she asked, concern in her eyes. "He was dismissive, Maya. I asked him why he targeted me, and he basically said it's just how it is. He talked about perceptions and expectations like it was my fault." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. It felt like he was saying, "I'm not good enough." Maya's expression hardened. "That's unacceptable. We need to find others who have faced similar situations. There has to be a pattern here." Jonathan nodded, feeling a spark of determination ignite within him. "You're right. Let's reach out to students and alumni. If Dr. Thompson is doing this to me, I know he's done it to others." As they began to brainstorm, they crafted a plan to gather testimonies. They decided to create a secure online forum where students could share their experiences anonymously. "We need to make it clear that they won't face any repercussions," Maya insisted. "This is about justice, not revenge." "Absolutely," Jonathan agreed. "We need to show the administration this isn't an isolated incident. It's a systemic issue." Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly, reaching out to former students and organizing meetings. The responses began to flood in, each story echoing the same themes of discrimination and bias. Jonathan found himself both outraged and empowered. Each account added weight to their cause, and he could feel the momentum building. The night before the final hearing, Jonathan sat in his room, surrounded by notes and testimonies. Just as he was about to call it a night, his phone buzzed with an anonymous message. Intrigued, he opened it to find a tip regarding a recording. "You need to listen to this," the message read. It's a meeting recording of Dr. Thompson discussing how to undermine students he deems unworthy. It's crucial evidence. Jonathan's heart raced. This could be the breakthrough he needed. He quickly replied, asking for more details, and within moments, he received a link to a secure file. As he clicked on it, he felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. This was not just about him anymore. It was about bringing the truth to light. He listened intently, his pulse quickening as the voices filled the room. Dr. Thompson's words echoed ominously, outlining his strategy to target students based on arbitrary judgments. Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. This was it. This was the evidence that could change everything. Jonathan took a deep breath as he stood before the university's ethics committee, clutching the recording in his hand like a lifeline. The sterile conference room felt suffocating, the glaring fluorescent lights buzzing above him. Maya stood beside him, her presence a steadying force, despite the palpable tension in the air. They had prepared meticulously for this moment, but now that it was here, Jonathan's heart raced. "Thank you for meeting with us," Jonathan began, his voice firm yet edged with anxiety. "I believe you'll find this recording to be crucial evidence." He pressed play on his device, and the room fell silent as the recording filled the air with the unmistakable voice of Dr. Thompson. "We need to make an example of students who don't fit our standards," Dr. Thompson's voice echoed, dripping with condescension. "They must understand that this is a competitive environment. If they plagiarize or underperform, it's our duty to ensure they know they don't belong here." Jonathan glanced at the committee members, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock. Maya leaned closer, her eyes wide, as the recording continued. They're not cut out for this. We can't let their mediocrity dilute the quality of our program, Dr. Thompson continued, his disdain palpable. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening. The committee chair, a stern woman with glasses perched on her nose, cleared her throat. This is serious, Mr. Carter. We will need to investigate these claims thoroughly. Jonathan felt a flicker of hope ignite within him, a small flame in the dark tunnel he had been navigating. Thank you. I believe this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are patterns of discrimination that have been overlooked for too long. Maya chimed in, her voice unwavering. We have testimonies from other students, those who face similar targeting and bias. This isn't just about Jonathan. It's about creating a fair environment for everyone. The committee members exchanged glances, their skepticism slowly giving way to curiosity. We will review your evidence, the chair said, her tone more measured now. But be aware, these investigations can be lengthy and complex. Understood, Jonathan replied, trying to suppress the swell of emotion rising in his chest. But I'm willing to see this through. It's imperative that we address these issues. As they left the meeting, a mixture of relief and apprehension washed over Jonathan. Do you think they'll actually take it seriously? He asked Maya, glancing sideways at her. I think they have to, she replied, determination shining in her eyes. This is bigger than us now, Jonathan. We're not just fighting for your case. We're fighting for every student who feels marginalized. However, as days turned into weeks, Jonathan began to notice the subtle backlash. Whispers followed him in the halls, and some faculty members cast him disapproving glances. He felt the weight of their scrutiny, and at times, it felt as though the walls were closing in. One afternoon, as he sat at a study table in the library, he overheard two professors discussing him. He should have known better than to challenge the authority, one said, his tone laced with disdain. Jonathan clenched his fists, fighting against the anger bubbling inside him. He was determined not to let their hostility derail his fight. It wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. It was about shining a light on the injustices that had long been ignored. Later that evening, Jonathan and Maya met at a coffee shop, their usual refuge from the stress of school. I can't believe they're still trying to undermine you, Maya said, her brow furrowed with concern. You're doing the right thing, Jonathan. Don't let their negativity get to you. I know, he replied, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. But it's hard. Every time I walk into class, it feels like I'm being judged, like they're waiting for me to fail. Maya reached across the table, placing her hand over his. You're stronger than they think. Remember why you're doing this. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who has been silenced. Jonathan nodded, her words resonating deep within him. He had come too far to back down now. The fight was bigger than just him. It was about creating a safe space for future generations of students who might face similar challenges. And with Maya by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. As the investigation reached its conclusion, Jonathan found himself pacing in his small apartment, the walls feeling closer than ever as anxiety gnawed at his insides. He had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, replaying every possible scenario in his mind, but nothing could quite prepare him for the reality of facing the committee. The weight of anticipation was palpable. It hung in the air like a thick fog, obscuring his thoughts and making it difficult to breathe. Maya had insisted on accompanying him, her presence a steadying force. You fought too hard for this. Remember, you're not alone, she reminded him as they walked toward the committee room. Her words were a balm to his frayed nerves, even if he couldn't shake the dread that settled in his stomach. As they entered the room, Jonathan felt all eyes on him. The committee members sat in a semicircle, their expressions inscrutable. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever news awaited him. The head of the committee, Dean Richards, a stern woman with sharp features, adjusted her glasses and looked at the gathered crowd, then at Jonathan. Thank you all for being here. We are here to discuss the findings of the investigation regarding Dr. Thompson and the allegations brought forth by Mr. Jonathan Carter. Her voice was calm, but Jonathan could sense an undercurrent of tension in the air. After a thorough review of the evidence, including testimonies from students and faculty, as well as the recording provided by Mr. Carter, we have come to a conclusion. Dean Richards continued, her gaze unwavering. Jonathan's heart raced as she paused, the silence stretching out like an eternity. Finally, she spoke again, her tone grave. We have found Dr. Thompson guilty of biased practices against minority students, which contravenes the ethical standards of our institution. As a result, he will be suspended for 1 semester, effective immediately. A wave of relief washed over Jonathan, but it was quickly followed by a surge of disbelief. "Is this really happening?" he whispered, glancing at Maya, who was beaming with pride. The committee members' expressions softened, and Jonathan felt the weight of their acknowledgement. "Mr. Carter, your courage in speaking out has not gone unnoticed," Dean Richards added, her voice warming slightly. "We commend you for your integrity and resilience in the face of adversity. Your name is hereby cleared, and we hope that your experience will lead to more significant changes in our institution." As the words sank in, Jonathan felt a mix of emotions: joy, relief, and a sense of purpose. This was not just a victory for him. It was a victory for all the students who had suffered in silence. After the meeting, the hallway buzzed with whispers and congratulations. Fellow students approached him, offering handshakes and pats on the back. "I knew you could do it, Jonathan," one classmate exclaimed, his eyes shining with admiration. "You stood up when so many wouldn't." Maya wrapped her arms around him, her enthusiasm contagious. "This is just the beginning, John. We can push for real change now." The following weeks saw a flurry of activity as Jonathan was invited to speak at forums and panels, sharing his story and advocating for diversity and inclusion within the medical school. His voice resonated with many, inspiring a movement that sought to address systemic issues within the institution. On graduation day, Jonathan stood tall in his cap and gown, the sunlight warming his face as he looked out at the sea of supportive friends and faculty. His heart swelled with pride, not just for his academic achievement, but for the journey he had undertaken. As he crossed the stage to receive his diploma, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. The fight for justice had transformed him, igniting a passion to advocate for those who felt unheard. He was determined to ensure that his experience would lead to meaningful change, not just for himself, but for future generations of medical students. With a scholarship in hand for his outstanding work in advocacy, Jonathan stepped off the stage, surrounded by applause and cheers. He turned to Maya, who beamed up at him with tears in her eyes. "We did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, we did," she replied, her smile radiant. As they walked away from the ceremony, Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was ready to fight for a future where every voice mattered, where diversity was celebrated, and where no student would have to face discrimination in silence again.